Agatha Raisin and the Murder at James Lacey's House. Good evening, dear friends, and welcome back to The Detective Notebook. James Lacey's house should have been peaceful, ordinary, even boring. But when Agatha Raisin steps inside, she finds a body, and James's carefully hidden secrets spilling into plain sight. In Carsely, gossip, jealousy, and danger collide, and Agatha realizes that James's life was far more tangled than anyone suspected. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? I love seeing how far our little mystery community reaches. Before we begin, feel free to tap the like button and subscribe. Only if this kind of cozy chaos is your cup of tea. It truly helps the channel grow and keeps these mysteries coming your way. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and grab a cup of tea, because tonight again we are going to step into Agatha's world. Chapter 1. Routine, Regret, and an Unwelcome Address. Agatha Raisin knew mornings were delicate negotiations between self-respect, caffeine, and the merciless judgment of cats. Today, the negotiations started with coffee strong enough to strip varnish. She poured it into her favorite floral mug, the one she had rescued from a jumble sale 5 years ago and stubbornly refused to replace, despite the chip that made it look perpetually wounded. Steam curled upward in fragrant, bitter spirals, and she inhaled deeply, wincing. "One day," she muttered, "I'll drink coffee like a civilized adult rather than a liquid furnace." But that day was not today. Hodge and Boswell, her 2 feline auditors, already occupied strategic positions in the kitchen. Hodge, long-haired and perpetually scandalized, flopped onto the counter and flicked a tail toward her slippers. Boswell, sleek and black as midnight without stars, perched on the windowsill, eyes narrowed to thin green slits. Both stared as though she had just proposed putting pineapple on toast, a crime of the highest order. Agatha sighed. I know. My wardrobe is tragic, my hair questionable, and I may have forgotten to wash my hands before breakfast. Happy now?" The cats blinked slowly, unimpressed. She buttered her toast with the precision of a surgeon, regretted it immediately, and poked the bread experimentally. "You'll be eaten eventually," she muttered, as if negotiating with a particularly stubborn toddler. Hodge meowed indignantly, nudging the plate with a paw. Boswell leapt onto the counter with an air of entitlement, tail curling arrogantly. Agatha sighed and sipped a portion of salmon pâté into their bowls. "Fine, you'll never admit it, but I am a saint." As she sipped coffee and chewed on her charcoal-browned toast, a letter slid through the mail slot with a crisp whisper, fluttering like a tiny bird of doom. Agatha flicked it up, squinting at the handwriting. James Lacey's neat, angular script stared back at her. "A small neighborhood planning meeting at his house," he announced politely. She froze, toast halfway to her mouth. The address alone stabbed memory and old frustrations alike. James Lacey. Former husband, occasional thorn in her side, persistent echo of what might have been, or perhaps what should have been forgotten entirely. She forced a casual expression onto her face, polished her nails with obsessive attention, and muttered, "Oh, well, how civilized." Her mind churned. Why now? Why a gathering? What is he planning that demands the attention of the entire street? She shook her head, trying to dislodge the stirrings of irritation and curiosity alike. Hodge leapt onto the windowsill, Boswell followed, and both glared at her like 2 small, furry Inquisition officers. They meowed with impatience, a synchronized demand for breakfast, and perhaps moral guidance. Agatha stirred her coffee, scratched at her temple, and sighed. Yes, more food for the perfect pets, more restraint for the imperfect me. She moved quickly, dishing out a second portion, and watched the cats eat with unspoken judgment. By the time the last bite was consumed and the bowls licked clean, Agatha felt the tension in her chest ease just slightly. She sipped the remaining coffee, inhaled the rich, bitter aroma, and let her gaze drift out the kitchen window. The garden glimmered with frost, the sun painting a pale gold across the thatched rooftops. Life in Carsely seemed ordinary, deceptively calm, but the letter sat on the counter, innocuous yet menacing. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted her coat, and lifted her chin. Very well, time to face the world. James Lacey's world. Let's see what trouble he's hiding behind those polite smiles. And with that, toast demolished, coffee nearly drained, and cats reluctantly sated, Agatha grabbed her handbag and stepped into the crisp winter air, curiosity prickling beneath irritation, aware that today would be far from ordinary.
Agatha Raisin pushed open the bell above the village shop door and was immediately greeted by the familiar scent of freshly baked bread, polish, and the faint tang of rain lingering on the wooden floorboards. The early morning sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across shelves stacked with tins, jars, and curious little ornaments that the owner, Mrs. Thimble, claimed she had collected from all over the empire. Agatha inhaled deeply, taking comfort in the mundane ritual of the shop. There was safety in routine, in predictability, in smells you recognized from childhood. "Ah, Agatha!" Penelope Grant's voice rang out like a bell that had been polished far too much. Penelope was perched behind the counter with the impeccable posture of a woman who believed she was the very axis of Carsely society. "Did you see James's note about the neighborhood gathering? Isn't it simply thrilling?" She beamed, teeth glinting in a way that suggested she had never encountered a problem she could not navigate with charm. Agatha stiffened, gripping her handbag a little too tightly. "Thrilling," she says, as if gossip and stale scones could ever be thrilling. Before Agatha could muster a suitably polite reply, Miranda Sharp appeared from the back of the shop, effortlessly gliding through aisles like she had been born with a silver spoon in one hand and a bouquet of spring flowers in the other. Miranda's warmth was genuine, her smile a radiant sunbeam, and every word seemed to carry an undertone of ease that Agatha found infuriating. She had the audacity to mention James casually, laughing about some minor household plan he was orchestrating. Agatha's fingers itched around the strap of her handbag. Why does she know him so well? Penelope clapped her hands together, spilling a bit of tea she had been holding like it was the elixir of life. The warm liquid spread across the counter, and Agatha's eyes narrowed in a combination of horror and fascination. "Oh, do be careful," she exclaimed, suppressing the urge to add a lecture on domestic negligence. The mishap gave Penelope the opportunity to launch into gossip about everyone who had allegedly fallen behind in their household duties while pretending to be concerned about the tea. Agatha's mind, however, kept returning to James. Everyone assumed he was thriving. Letters and polite chatter painted him as cheerful, composed, entirely in control. But there was something about his sudden initiative in organizing the gathering that felt off. She hated herself for the prickling curiosity, for caring too much about what her former husband was doing. Yet there was no denying the pull of unfinished business, the tension between what she had left behind and what she might uncover today. Miranda's laughter rang again, soft and melodic, as she brushed past a shelf of preserves, pausing to comment on a particularly charming tin of biscuits. Agatha noted every detail, the way Miranda leaned slightly toward James in conversation, the effortless charm that made the villagers smile, the unspoken familiarity. The subtle rivalry tightened like a corset around Agatha's chest, reminding her that not all battles were fought with words. Some were waged with poise, presence, and natural warmth. By the time Agatha left the shop, the bell above the door chimed a quiet warning. The invitation, polite as it seemed, had become unavoidable. The crisp morning air, tinged with the smell of rain-soaked earth, reminded her of the garden at home, of cats waiting impatiently for breakfast, and of the lingering questions about James. Why now? Why this meeting? And why did it feel as though the village itself held its breath in anticipation, waiting for Agatha to step into the fray? Her resolve hardened with each step along the cobbled street. The meeting was not optional, the curiosity too potent to ignore. She adjusted her coat, smoothed her hair, and braced herself for the inevitable social minefield awaiting her at James Lacey's house. Chapter 2. A house too quiet. Agatha Raisin walked briskly down the narrow cobbled lane leading to James Lacey's house, the chill of early morning pressing against her cheeks like an insistent reminder that she had no choice but to attend. Her heels clicked against wet stone, a sharp counterpoint to the soft twitter of birds in the frost-tipped hedgerows. She tugged her coat tighter, inhaling the sharp, earthy scent of winter's last breath, mingling with the faint perfume of the roses James had tended so obsessively last year. She arrived earlier than expected, hoping to appear punctual without inviting attention. The front door was slightly ajar, her brow furrowed. James was always meticulous, never careless, never late. A sense of unease prickled her skin. She called softly, "James? It's Agatha. Good morning." The words sounded too loud in the eerie stillness. There was no response. The familiar warmth of home was replaced by an unnatural hush, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Stepping inside, she was struck by the silence. The kettle sat unused, the faint aroma of cold water mingling with the faint scent of polished wood and old books. A chair lay toppled near the doorway, as though someone had left in haste or had been forced. Her pulse quickened, but she forced her shoulders to relax. Calm, Agatha. Perhaps he's merely... A faint creak of floorboard under her foot seemed to echo. She took another cautious step. Her eyes swept over the familiar sitting room, now disturbingly alien. A cushion displaced, a newspaper half-folded, a cup left cold on the side table. Her heart whispered that something was very wrong. She paused, hand gripping the edge of the doorframe, and swallowed. Then she saw it. A small movement, a tremor in the shadows, and her stomach plummeted. James Lacey was there, sprawled unnaturally across the floor. The sight was quiet, almost still, yet it contained a gravity that stole her breath. Agatha's hands tightened into fists, nails pressing into palms she barely noticed. Her throat constricted. A quiet, private gasp escaped before she could even consider calling out. She knelt beside him cautiously, feeling the chill of the wooden floor through the soles of her shoes. The coldness that emanated from his body was not just physical, it carried a weight that pressed into her chest. "No, oh, this cannot be happening," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The room smelled faintly of old wood, damp plaster, and a hint of tobacco smoke that seemed to linger, stubborn and unwelcome. Agatha's mind raced, not with panic, but with sharp, quiet questions. Was she meant to find him? What had happened here before anyone else arrived? The kettle, the chair, the unopened letters, each detail tugged at the edges of her curiosity, demanding attention, threatening to unravel the comfortable, orderly world she relied upon. She backed away slowly, her heart still thumping, and leaned against the doorway. The winter sunlight filtering through the curtained windows seemed strangely harsh now, highlighting the disarray and the eerie calm that settled over the room. Outside, the distant clatter of footsteps and voices carried faintly through the air, neighbors beginning to gather, unaware of what lay inside. Agatha drew a deep, trembling breath, smoothing her coat and straightening her hair, as if ritual could impose normality on chaos. She stepped back into the corridor, glancing once more at the room. The door remained ajar, a quiet invitation to the village, or perhaps a warning. With her heart still tight at her chest, she prepared herself to face the inevitable intrusion of the curious, the concerned, and the gossiping alike. In Carsely, everyone would soon gather, and Agatha knew, with the certainty of experience, that once the village arrived, nothing would remain calm for long.
The arrival of the police was quiet, efficient, and completely unceremonious, a stark contrast to the flurry of neighbors spilling onto James Lacey's driveway. Agatha Raisin lingered in the hallway, coat dusted with frost, her eyes flicking over the familiar rooms now tinged with disquiet. The faint smell of burnt wood drifted from the fireplace, mingling with the aroma of polished oak and a lingering trace of James's old tobacco. She inhaled slowly, letting each sensory detail register. Something about the room felt staged. Penelope Grant, ever the organizer, had immediately commandeered the kitchen, wielding a teapot as if it were a ceremonial scepter. Cups were arranged with military precision, sugar cubes stacked like miniature towers, and biscuits aligned perfectly on plates. "Tea, everyone! Tea is essential," she announced, voice carrying the authority of a woman who believed the fate of the world hinged on proper refreshments. Agatha suppressed a snort. Even now Penelope could turn catastrophe into an Olympic event. Miranda Sharp hovered near the doorway, pale and trembling, but still effortlessly composed, in a way that made Agatha grit her teeth. She whispered gently to one of the arriving neighbors, offering calm words and subtle support, yet her gaze kept flicking toward James's sitting room, as if calculating, assessing. Why does she know him so well? Agatha's stomach twisted with irritation and reluctant curiosity. The villagers milled about, murmuring speculations under their breath. One elderly man peered into the room, nodding solemnly. "Probably an accident," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Agatha's lips pressed into a tight line. Quietly she disagreed. Nothing about the scene was accidental. The tipped chair, the cold kettle, the faintly burnt remnants in the fireplace. Her eyes caught a corner of charred paper, half hidden beneath the hearthrug. What had been there? Why burned? Agatha stepped closer under the pretext of examining the teacups, glancing unobtrusively at the sitting room. The fireplace, usually a place of domestic warmth, now held a sinister air. A half-burnt letter curled like a blackened leaf, its edges crisp and delicate. She could make out fragments, part of a name, a hastily scribbled date, nothing legible enough to reveal meaning, but enough to ignite curiosity. No one noticed her noting it, everyone too distracted by murmurs and sips of tea. Nearby, Penelope fussed with the teapot again, dropping a sugar cube and muttering under her breath about clumsy hands. Agatha suppressed a dry smile, observing the incongruity, the calm ritual of tea in the midst of tragedy. The aroma of Earl Grey and faint burnt wood seemed absurdly domestic, and yet somehow grounding. Miranda's gaze swept the room once more, lingering on the toppled chair near the fireplace, then shifting toward the cold kettle. Her expression was unreadable. Sorrow, concern, calculation, or a mix of all three. Agatha filed the details away in her mind, noting positions, expressions, and subtle gestures, pieces of a puzzle that no one else seemed to see. A neighbor whispered again, this time speculating about a mishap with a stove or a candle. Agatha's pulse quickened with quiet determination. Something was off, though she could not yet articulate exactly what. The room, the objects, the arrangements, each element felt deliberate. But why? Who would stage a domestic scene with such precision? Drawing a quiet breath, Agatha straightened, adjusting her coat and smoothing her hair. She sipped her tea with careful moderation, letting the warmth settle into her chest, providing a small measure of comfort. The villagers' murmurs continued around her, but Agatha's mind was already working, observing, cataloguing, connecting. She glanced once more at the half-burnt letter and the displaced vase near the fireplace, committing each to memory. Something told her that these small, seemingly inconsequential details were important. She would need to look closer very soon when the opportunity presented itself. For now she waited, calm on the surface, alert beneath, ready to unravel the first threads of a mystery that promised to be far more tangled than anyone suspected. Chapter 3. Suspects with Perfect Manners. The sign above the wheat sheaf creaked lazily in the breeze as Agatha Raisin pushed open the door, stepping into the familiar warmth of the village pub. The scent of roasted malt, simmering stew, and faintly dusty upholstery enveloped her like a soft, comforting hug, though today it was tinged with tension. The regular hum of chatter seemed subdued, punctuated by whispered condolences, anxious coughs, and the occasional creak of floorboards under careful steps. Inside, Penelope Grant had claimed the prime table by the fire, draping her coat like a ceremonial banner. She mourned loudly, a theatrical performance in which every sob was calibrated for maximum visibility. "I simply cannot believe it," she declared, dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. "James, always so organized, so meticulous, and now—" Her words drifted into a sigh that seemed designed to ripple across the entire pub, ensuring that every villager felt her grief acutely. Agatha suppressed a dry smile. Of course Penelope makes everything competitive.
definitive, even sorrow. Across the room, Miranda Sharp mourned with grace, offering quiet condolences and gentle hand squeezes to those seated nearby. Her movements were effortless, her voice soft yet captivating, the kind that inspired trust without demanding it. Agatha bristled, noting the contrast. Why does she have to be perfect at everything, even mourning? Other villagers followed varying scripts. Some whispered strategically to select confidants, as if calculating alliances and sharing only necessary tidbits. Others flitted from table to table, balancing polite curiosity with obvious attempts to appear unaffected. Agatha's sharp eyes caught tiny inconsistencies. Who arrived first? Who avoided certain interactions? Who glanced nervously at the fireplace where James's body had been found? Each observation threaded quietly through her mind, a tapestry of subtle clues. A waiter, balancing a tray of peanuts and half-filled glasses, offered a moment of comic relief. "Peanuts, anyone?" he chirped, and a few villagers laughed, breaking the tension like sunlight cutting through fog. Agatha allowed herself a small smile, noting the absurdity. Here they were, negotiating grief as if it were a competitive sport, yet still reaching for the universal comfort of salty snacks. Even sorrow had its routine, it seemed. Agatha sipped her tea, warm and slightly bitter, letting the flavor anchor her thoughts. She listened far more than she spoke, cataloging snippets of conversation, gestures, and silences. The way Penelope shifted constantly in her seat, the fleeting glances Miranda exchanged with a few villagers, the nervous twitch of the postman's fingers. All details that seemed trivial to anyone else, but were threads Agatha would later weave together. Her eyes returned to the fireplace where the faint trace of soot from James's half-burnt letter lingered. No one paid attention to it now, too busy performing grief in their own carefully choreographed ways. Agatha considered the timing of arrivals and departures, the small inconsistencies in behavior. Who was genuinely mourning and who was hiding relief? A subtle smile tugged at her lips. She would need patience, keen observation, and just the right moment to untangle the web that was already forming. The pub's low hum, punctuated by the occasional clink of cups and murmured condolences, wrapped around her like a blanket of social ritual. Agatha felt her curiosity sharpen, tinged with irritation and a strange thrill. The threads of pretense, of hidden motives and misaligned grief were waiting to be followed. With tea warming her hands and her mind alert, she prepared to leave the table, confident that subtle observation, quiet patience, and attention to inconsistencies would reveal more than any direct question ever could. She arose, smoothing her coat, and glanced toward a corner where a quiet figure had been watching the room intently. Time to follow a lead, she decided, already calculating her next move.
Agatha Raisin crouched beside James Lacey's cold fireplace, the faint smell of smoke curling around her nose. The hearth, though neat, held a stubborn fragment of paper that refused to yield entirely to flame. She picked it up gingerly, careful not to crumble the delicate edges. Charred but legible enough to tease the mind, the fragment bore a partial name, just a few letters, and a hastily scribbled date. Nothing conclusive, yet her pulse quickened. Even in its incompleteness, it whispered secrets. The paper felt fragile under her fingertips, slightly crisp but strangely resistant to decay, as if insisting on revealing its message at the perfect moment. Agatha's mind raced. Who wrote this? Whose name is this? And why attempt to burn it at all? Her instincts, honed through years of village intrigue, told her that half-truths were often more dangerous than complete ones. She barely had time to ponder further before a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ah, Agatha, I didn't expect anyone so hands-on," said Miranda Sharp, standing gracefully at the fireplace's edge. Her expression was calm, polite, yet her eyes carried that familiar spark, probing, subtle, intelligent. Agatha's lips pressed into a tight line, heart performing a discreet jig of irritation. "Merely curious," Agatha replied, letting the word carry more indifference than she felt. She shifted the fragment slightly in her fingers, pretending to inspect a soot mark rather than the clue she had just retrieved. Miranda's gaze lingered, warm and insistent, a silent challenge. Agatha felt the hum of jealousy stir beneath civility. Of course she notices. Of course she would. Everything is effortless for her. Miranda smiled faintly, tilting her head as though she were considering whether to comment further or withdraw. Agatha resisted the urge to retreat. Instead, she tucked the fragment carefully into the pocket of her coat, hiding it from view with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to carrying secrets. If anyone else glimpses this, it could ruin everything, she thought. Better to have it in my control until the time is right. Around them, the pub's residual warmth and muted murmurs of neighbors created a cocoon of domestic normality. The aroma of tea, faintly burnt toast from someone's breakfast, and the subtle sweetness of biscuits lingered in the air. Agatha inhaled deeply, letting the familiar comfort soothe the prickling tension. Even amidst discovery and secrecy, the ordinary details of village life offered a strange reassurance. Her eyes flicked back to the fireplace, taking in the subtle details. The soot-streaked mantel, the slightly displaced hearth rug, the faint curve of ash suggesting where the letter had been bent. Each observation layered onto the next, weaving a narrative of carelessness or deliberate misdirection that only she seemed to notice. Someone wanted it burned, but not entirely. Someone wanted it hidden, yet visible enough for the right person to notice. Agatha's pulse steadied as she stood, adjusting her coat and smoothing her hair, masking her excitement behind a calm exterior. Miranda continued to watch her, polite but perceptive, and Agatha smiled faintly, the smallest edge of satisfaction sharpening the moment. There was more to uncover here, and she had the first thread. The fragment was modest, yet in her pocket it became a key, subtle, unassuming, and brimming with questions. Whose name had been written? Why had they tried to erase it? And what secrets lay hidden beneath the polite veneers of those around James? Agatha knew the answers would emerge slowly, but each piece she collected brought her closer to understanding. With one last glance at the fireplace and the half-burnt letter fragment secured, she stepped back into the hum of conversation, her mind alert and quietly triumphant. More secrets were waiting, she knew, just beyond sight, ready to surface when the village allowed it. And Agatha Raisin, as always, was ready to notice first.
Chapter 4. Romance, Rivalry, and Red Herrings. Agatha Raisin stood at the edge of James Lacey's garden with her arms folded, staring at the neat winter beds as though they personally offended her. The place was far too orderly for a man who, by all accounts, had been harboring secrets. Pruned roses slept beneath frost, paths were swept clean, and the compost heap, annoyingly, was properly covered. It felt curated, controlled, and that unsettled her more than chaos ever could. She bent to inspect a patch of disturbed soil near the fence, her sensible shoes sinking slightly into damp earth. Someone had been here recently. Not gardeners. This was deliberate, careful work. Agatha straightened just as footsteps crunched behind her. "Oh, Agatha! Fancy seeing you here!" Miranda Sharp emerged as if summoned by irritation itself, bundled in an elegant coat that somehow made muddy gardens look fashionable. She smiled warmly, but there was hesitation beneath it, like someone bracing for an awkward truth. "I might say the same," Agatha replied coolly, "though I imagine you've been here often." Miranda hesitated, then nodded. "James and we were working on something together." Agatha felt the words land like frostbite. "Working," she repeated. "How collaborative." Miranda exhaled, glancing toward the house as if ensuring privacy. "It wasn't romantic, if that's what you're thinking." "I rarely think that," Agatha lied. Miranda smiled faintly. "He wanted it kept quiet, said it would upset people unnecessarily." Agatha's mind raced. Upset who and why? Before she could press further, a sharp voice cut through the winter air. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Penelope Grant appeared from behind the hedge, armed with a thermos and a look of delighted suspicion. "I thought I'd check on the garden committee's interests. Imagine my surprise." Agatha opened her mouth to respond when sudden rustling erupted near the compost heap. Something small, determined, and deeply offended burst forth, a hedgehog wobbling indignantly across the path. "Oh, no, you don't!" Penelope shrieked, hopping backward and spilling tea everywhere. Miranda laughed despite herself. Agatha stared as the hedgehog trundled straight into Penelope's sensible shoe, paused, and curled defensively. "Well, Agatha said dryly. "Someone here has better survival instincts than the rest of us." The moment broke. Laughter bubbled awkwardly, tension dissolving into the absurdity of village life. Penelope dabbed at her coat, muttering about wildlife boundaries, while Miranda carefully relocated the hedgehog to the hedge with surprising gentleness. As calm returned, Agatha watched Miranda closely. The warmth, the composure, it all felt genuine. Too genuine. That bothered her more than deceit ever could. "What exactly were you planning with James?" Agatha asked quietly. Miranda met her gaze. "Something that would change how people saw him, maybe even how they saw this village." Before Agatha could push further, a sharp voice cut through the winter air. "Well, I don't know about secrets, but I do know this garden's going to be a point of discussion at the next meeting." Agatha smiled tightly. "Of course it will." As they dispersed, Agatha lingered, eyes tracing the paths, the soil, the deliberate care. Romance would have been simpler. Rivalry, predictable. But this felt like misdirection. False conclusions were sprouting everywhere. And gardens, she knew, only revealed their truths when something was dug up.
By the time Agatha Raisin returned to her cottage that evening, the conclusion was already making the rounds of Carsely like an overfed cat. Everyone knew who had done it. She knew because Hodge was sitting on the newspaper in a proprietary way that suggested bad news, and Boswell was batting at the corner where a photograph peeked out. James Lacey's house in the background, and in the foreground, a familiar villager looking startled and faintly guilty. "Oh no," Agatha muttered, peeling the paper free. "That won't do at all." The suspect was obvious, painfully so. A person with motive that could be summarized in 2 neat sentences, opportunity that fit a tidy timeline, and a personality the village already enjoyed disliking. It was the sort of solution that made people nod solemnly and feel clever for agreeing with one another. Agatha hated it instantly. She poured herself a drink she pretended was medicinal and read the article twice. The phrasing was cautious but pointed. Lines of inquiry, assisting police with their investigations, previously strained relationship. "Rubbish," she said aloud. Boswell flicked his tail in agreement, knocking over a coaster. Hodge yawned as if the matter were beneath him. The next morning, she found herself at the edge of the village green, where a uniformed police officer was speaking with Penelope Grant and 2 other women, who leaned in with synchronized concern. Agatha waited until Penelope finished her theatrical sigh before stepping forward. "Officer," Agatha said pleasantly, "may I ask why you're so certain?" The officer, young, earnest, and clearly regretting his career choices, shifted his weight. "Certain is a strong word, Mrs. Raisin." "Not strong enough," Agatha replied. "You have a suspect everyone already dislikes, a half-explained argument, and a timeline that depends on people remembering times accurately after drinking sherry." Penelope sniffed. "It all fits." "Exactly," Agatha said. "That's the problem." The officer frowned. "We're following procedure, and I'm following common sense, which is rarely procedural but often correct." He smiled thinly. "Unless you have evidence, I have instincts." He glanced at his notebook. "Those aren't admissible." Agatha leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Then why burn a letter?" The officer stiffened. "What letter?" Agatha straightened, satisfaction blooming briefly before fading. Too brief. She'd gained nothing tangible, no answers. Just a flicker of unease she'd successfully planted, and that would have to be enough for now. As she walked away, Agatha catalogued what bothered her. The suspects' anger had been public, not secretive, their movements accounted for by people who loved gossip too much to lie well. And most of all, James had been careful. Whatever had happened in that house required planning or panic under pressure. Convenience rarely killed anyone. People did. Back home, Agatha sat at her kitchen table, staring at the chipped mug James had once teased her about. She hadn't thrown it away. She hadn't admitted she'd kept it. The village wanted closure. The police wanted efficiency. And somewhere beneath the neat explanation, something important was being overlooked. Something emotional, something private. Agatha felt it settle in her chest, heavy and familiar. This wasn't about who could have done it. It was about who needed everyone else to stop looking. She took a slow sip of tea, grimaced, and sighed. "All right, James," she said softly to the empty room. What mess did you leave behind this time? The cats watched her, unblinking. The stakes, she realized, were no longer just intellectual. They were personal.
Chapter 5. Agatha's Blind Spot. Agatha sat at her kitchen table long after the kettle had boiled itself into a sulk, the water inside cooling into something accusatory. Outside, Carsely hummed gently with late-afternoon normalcy, distant lawn mowers, a dog barking with misplaced optimism, the faint scent of someone else's baking drifting through an open window. Inside, Hodge and Boswell occupied their usual positions of moral superiority, watching her as if she were a disappointing television program. "I know," Agatha told them, rubbing her temples. "I shouldn't think about him." Boswell blinked slowly. Hodge turned his back. Thinking about James Lacey had always been a dangerous pastime, not because it made her sentimental. Agatha Raisin did not do sentiment, but because it made her inaccurate. She remembered him now in irritating fragments, the way he took his tea too weak, the infuriating calm with which he disagreed, the faintly superior tilt of his head when he believed he was being reasonable. None of it was fond. None of it was bitter. It was worse than that. It was honest. She remembered arguments that ended without winners, silences that lingered too long, a sense that they had both expected more and never quite known how to ask for it. And threaded through all of it was something she disliked intensely, a feeling that James had always seen her more clearly than she liked. Agatha pushed her chair back and stood, pacing the narrow kitchen. "You're dead," she said aloud, not unkindly. "You don't get to confuse me now." Boswell meowed, sharp and judgmental, and hopped onto the counter, knocking a teaspoon to the floor. Hodge followed, demanding food with the air of a cat who believed emotional distress should always be answered with tuna. Agatha fed them automatically, the familiar routine grounding her. The clink of bowls, the sound of enthusiastic eating, the faint smell of fish. Comfort returned in increments, enough for her to think. The problem was simple and deeply irritating. She might be wrong. Not about the facts, those were stubborn things, but about the shape of them, about motive, about intention, about James himself. She had been assuming things based on old habits, old wounds she insisted had healed simply because she no longer prodded them daily. What if she was protecting someone without realizing it? The thought landed unpleasantly. Agatha prided herself on objectivity, on seeing through nonsense and calling it by its proper name, but James had always complicated that. Even now, inconveniently dead, he managed to sit somewhere in her mind and tilt the furniture. She poured herself a fresh cup of tea and actually waited for it to steep, which felt like progress. As she lifted the mug, her eyes fell on the fireplace across the room, and with it the memory of the half-burnt letter, a name, a date, and her assumption that it pointed outward, away from James. "What if it doesn't?" she murmured. Hodge paused mid-bite and looked at her. Agatha felt a small, unwelcome shift inside her chest. If James had been frightened, or cornered, or trying to fix something quietly, then the story she had been telling herself was missing a crucial piece, and she had been avoiding that possibility because it required her to admit she hadn't known him as well as she thought, or worse, that she had. She set the mug down carefully. Somewhere between memory and evidence, a truth was waiting, and she had the uneasy feeling that when she found it, it would not be kind. Agatha decided that if time was going to be the problem, then she would make it sit still and behave. She spread her notes across the kitchen table with the solemnity of a woman laying out tarot cards she didn't believe in, but deeply respected. Times, statements, half-remembered arrivals, cups of tea offered and refused. The kettle clicked off behind her, unacknowledged. Hodge and Boswell watched from their chairs like judges at a small, poorly organized trial. "Right," Agatha said. "Let's see who's been creative." She began with the obvious. Penelope Grant's timeline was a marvel of efficiency. She had apparently been everywhere at once, offering condolences, boiling kettles, and witnessing key moments with almost supernatural precision. Too precise. Agatha circled a time in red pen and sniffed. Then Miranda Sharp. Calm, measured. Her account slid neatly into place, every minute accounted for. Perhaps too neatly. Agatha didn't circle Miranda's times, she underlined them instead. Twice, hard enough to dent the paper. People who tell the truth don't polish it, Agatha muttered. She moved on, reconstructing the morning minute by minute. James's invitation had specified an early start. She herself had arrived before most. The kettle was cold. Cold, not recently boiled. That mattered. She wrote it down again, slower this time. Tea went cold on the counter as Agatha leaned closer to the table, her mind tightening around a single window of time that refused to behave. One alibi depended entirely on a clock in the village shop, a clock Agatha knew to be temperamental on a good day and outright fictional on a bad one. She stood abruptly, chair scraping. "I knew it." Boswell startled and leapt down, affronted. Hodge merely flicked an ear. Agatha fetched the small notebook she carried everywhere and flipped back to a scribble she'd nearly dismissed. Someone had said, just after 9. Someone else had said, closer to past. And someone, careful, confident someone, had anchored their entire story to a moment that now looked increasingly flexible. She checked her watch, then the wall clock, then the old carriage clock on the mantelpiece, the one James had once fixed for her, muttering about patience and gears. It was running 3 minutes slow. Her breath caught, just slightly. If you adjusted one, you could adjust another. The realization didn't arrive with drama. It settled instead, like dust in sunlight. One alibi didn't collapse with a bang. It sagged, quietly, almost politely. And another, previously flimsy, grew stronger by comparison, gaining weight simply by not relying on mechanical honesty. Agatha sank back into her chair. Timing wasn't about minutes, it was about control. Someone had needed a specific window, a narrow one, enough time to act, to arrange, to leave just enough disorder to look accidental, not panic, planning. Her tea was stone cold now. She drank it anyway, grimacing. "Serves me right," she told the room. Hodge jumped onto the table, stepping squarely on her notes. Boswell followed, sitting directly on the circled times. Together they managed to obscure exactly the right detail. Agatha laughed beside herself. Yes, I see it too. She gathered the papers carefully, her earlier doubt replaced with a steadier resolve. Someone had lied about time because time was the only thing that couldn't argue back. But she could. And now that she knew when, she was very close to knowing why. Agatha glanced toward the door, heart ticking louder than any clock in the room. The next conversation, she suspected, would not be polite.
Chapter 6. The Village Cracks. If there was one thing Carsely valued more than cake, it was politeness. Agatha Raisin intended to use that against it. The spring charity bake sale occupied the village green like a cheerful invasion. Tables sagged under Victoria sponges, lemon drizzle loaves, and a suspicious number of brownies claiming to be gluten-free without any visible evidence. Bunting fluttered. Someone played a radio far too loudly. It was the sort of event designed to suggest wholesomeness, which made it an ideal place to apply pressure very gently indeed. Agatha drifted from table to table, tea in hand, smiling just enough to be disarming. She asked questions the way other people offered compliments, casually, publicly, and with impeccable timing. "Penelope," she said pleasantly, pausing near a tower of iced cupcakes, "you were the first to arrive at James's house after me, weren't you?" Penelope Grant stiffened, her smile freezing amid charity. "Well, yes, I do like to be helpful." "Of course," Agatha said. "And you'd already boiled the kettle at home." Penelope's hand tightened around a cake knife. "Naturally." "How efficient," Agatha replied. "You must move very quickly." A ripple passed through the listeners nearby. Penelope flushed. "Are you suggesting something, Agatha?" "Goodness, no," Agatha said lightly. "I much prefer asking." Penelope snapped then, not loudly, but sharply enough to cut. "This is hardly the place." Agatha glanced around at the bunting, the cakes, the expectant faces. "Isn't it?" She moved on before Penelope could recover, leaving behind a silence filled with icing sugar and curiosity. Miranda Sharp stood a little apart, arranging napkins with unnecessary precision. Agatha approached her next, selecting a scone she had no intention of eating. "Miranda," she said gently, pausing near a tower of iced cupcakes, "you mentioned you'd spoken to James the evening before." Miranda's smile flickered. "Briefly. And he seemed prompted." Miranda folded a napkin, then another. "Preoccupied." "About the meeting?" Miranda hesitated. "Just a second too long."
"About something," then added quickly, "I really must see to the raffle tickets." She withdrew with grace, but it was the retreat that mattered. Miranda didn't snap, she didn't argue, she disappeared. Agatha watched her go, noting the way conversation bent subtly away from Miranda's absence. People noticed, they always did. A laugh erupted nearby as someone dropped a tray of biscuits, sending them skittering across the grass. Agatha helped pick them up, making a dry remark about 5-second rules being optimistic at best. Laughter followed, relief laughter. Tension punctured just enough. She continued her circuit. Small questions, harmless observations. Who had arrived when? Who had spoken to whom? Each answer shifted the atmosphere slightly, like a draft through an open door. By the time Agatha returned to her starting point, politeness was beginning to fray. Smiles were tighter, voices a fraction sharper. The village was cracking, not loudly, but audibly if one knew how to listen. Agatha sipped her tea, now lukewarm, and surveyed the scene. One person had snapped, one had withdrawn. Others watched carefully, recalibrating. Still, something was missing, a piece that didn't belong to any of them. As the bake sale wound down and people packed away plates, Agatha felt the familiar prickle between her shoulders, the sense of being close, but not close enough. Who would crack next? And why hadn't they yet? Agatha had always believed that clues behaved like people. If you stared at them long enough, they eventually revealed what they really were. The trouble was, sometimes they changed their minds first. She sat in her front room that evening with the fragment of burned paper laid carefully on the coffee table, weighted at the corners with old coasters James had once mocked mercilessly. Outside, dusk softened Carsely into gentle silhouettes. Inside, Hodge occupied the arm of the sofa like an emperor, while Boswell sat directly on Agatha's notebook, ensuring she worked around him. "I had you wrong," Agatha said to the paper, "and I don't like being wrong." The fragment showed a partial name, a date, and a line she'd originally dismissed as vague. She read it again, slower this time, letting go of the assumption that it pointed toward conflict. When she did, something shifted, quietly, decisively. It wasn't a threat. It was a proposal. Agatha felt the realization settle with an odd warmth. The phrasing, what remained of it, was practical, understated, and almost apologetic. James's style. The date wasn't a deadline. It was a start. "Oh," she said softly, "you idiot." Hodge flicked an ear. Boswell purred, smug. James had been planning something helpful, something discreet, the sort of thing that required quiet conversations and careful timing, the sort of thing that might upset the delicate balances of Carsely if handled openly. And someone who benefited from the way things were, had not wanted that. Agatha leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Motive rearranged itself in her mind, pieces sliding into a new, far more uncomfortable shape. This wasn't about jealousy or spite or an argument gone wrong. It was about prevention. She thought of the people she'd spoken to, of politeness under pressure, of who snapped, who withdrew, who relied on clocks and neat stories, of who might smile through benevolence but panic at change. "Who would stop a good deed?" Agatha murmured. Boswell kneaded the notebook, claws pricking. Agatha stood and paced, energy returning with interest. James hadn't been reckless, he'd been careful. And careful people didn't burn plans unless they were afraid someone else might find them first. Which meant the fire hadn't been for privacy, it had been for erasure. Agatha picked up the fragment, suddenly aware of how close she was to the truth and how little she liked it. The village wasn't hiding a villain, it was hiding a fear. She glanced toward the door, imagining conversations yet to come, imagining faces when she reframed the question not as who killed James, but who needed him silent. Her pulse quickened, not with dread, but with clarity. "Well," she said briskly, gathering her things, "that changes everything." The cats watched her with identical expressions of disdain. Agatha paused, one hand on her coat, and looked back at the quiet room. James's absence felt different now, not unfinished, but interrupted. And whoever interrupted him had done so very deliberately. She stepped outside into the cool evening air, already rehearsing her next questions. This time, she wouldn't ask politely.
Chapter 7. Truth in the Open. Agatha Raisin believed firmly that if one was going to make people uncomfortable, one might as well do it properly. That was why she invited everyone to James Lacey's house. The sitting room had been tidied to within an inch of its life, as if order might erase memory. Chairs were arranged in a loose, polite circle, far enough apart to avoid intimacy, close enough to prevent escape. The curtains were open, letting in a pale afternoon light that showed everything and softened nothing. Agatha stood near the mantelpiece, impeccably dressed, chin lifted, nerves tucked away where they couldn't betray her. Hodge and Boswell had been left at home after expressing their opinion of gatherings by attempting to trip her repeatedly. She missed their judgmental solidarity acutely. The villagers arrived in ones and twos. Penelope Grant entered first, lips tight, eyes sharp, handbag clutched like a shield. Miranda Sharp followed, calm but paler than usual, offering a smile that didn't quite land. Others filled the room with murmurs, coats rustling, the faint smell of wool and perfume, and restrained anxiety. Tea was poured. Cups clinked. No one drank much. Agatha waited until everyone was seated. The silence stretched, thick and awkward, until someone coughed. "Thank you for coming," Agatha said pleasantly. "I promise not to keep you long. I merely thought it might be useful to talk openly." Penelope sniffed. "Isn't that the police's job?" "They've done admirably," Agatha replied, "but they're looking for guilt. I'm looking for truth. The two don't always sit together comfortably." A ripple passed through the room. Agatha continued, her voice calm, conversational. "James invited you all here for a reason. Not just a meeting, not just neighborly planning. He was working on something kind, something that would have changed things." Miranda's hands tightened in her lap. "Someone found out and panicked, not because James was dangerous, but because he was helpful." A chair creaked. Someone shifted. Penelope laughed sharply. "That's absurd." "Is it? Or is it merely inconvenient?" She walked slowly around the circle, meeting eyes without accusation. The letter in the fireplace wasn't a threat. It was a plan, burned not in anger, but in fear that someone else would see it. The air felt brittle now, ready to snap. Agatha stopped behind one chair. "I'm not interested in public shame," she said quietly, "but I am interested in honesty, because James deserves that much." No one spoke. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere a bird called. Ordinary sounds pressing against extraordinary silence. Agatha folded her hands, her heart steady, her voice gone soft. "Who wants to speak first?" The question hung in the air, unbearable and inevitable. Someone was going to break. It was only a matter of when. Agatha let the silence do the work for her. It pressed against the walls, against the carefully arranged furniture, against the composure everyone had brought with them like a coat they hoped not to remove. She stood very still, hands folded, eyes thoughtful rather than accusing. This was not a trap. It was an invitation. "I'll say it plainly," Agatha said at last. "James Lacey wasn't threatening anyone. He was protecting someone, quietly, kindly, and that frightened the wrong person." Miranda Sharp's breath caught. It was a small sound, almost lost, but Agatha heard it. Penelope scoffed, too loudly. "This is ridiculous. James was always meddling. He loved feeling useful." "Yes," Agatha said gently, "and he was very good at it." She turned to Miranda. "You knew what he was planning." Miranda's smile trembled. "Lots of people knew James had ideas." "Not this one," Agatha replied. "This one involved timing, discretion, and a letter meant to help someone avoid a public embarrassment that would have ruined them socially." A murmur rippled through the room. Agatha continued, her voice steady. "You were helping him arrange it. That's why you withdrew at the bake sale. You were afraid I'd see it in your face." Miranda swallowed. You didn't kill him," Agatha said calmly, "but you saw the plan, and you told someone else." All eyes shifted. Penelope's face had gone very still. Agatha turned to her at last. "James discovered something, not criminal, just inconvenient. Something about the way you've been presenting yourself to the village for years, your charity work, your committees, your careful image." Penelope laughed, brittle and sharp. "You're accusing me of vanity in this village?" "No," Agatha said softly. "I'm accusing you of fear." The words landed with a thud. James had intended to smooth things over, to help Penelope step back quietly before the truth became gossip. He'd written a plan, a benevolent one. He'd asked Miranda to help because he trusted her discretion. "And you," Agatha went on, "read that letter. You saw your future unraveling, and you panicked." Penelope's hands shook. "I only went to talk to him." "You went earlier than you told anyone. You adjusted the clock you knew others relied on. You argued. He wouldn't back down." Tears welled suddenly, shocking in their intensity. "He looked at me like I was a child, like I should be grateful." "And you pushed him," Agatha said, not unkindly, "not to kill him, just to make him stop. But he fell." The room held its breath. "I didn't mean—" Penelope broke then, collapsing into the nearest chair, sobs racking her body. Agatha felt the familiar ache of it, the waste, the smallness of the moment that changed everything. No monster, just fear, sharpened by pride. James's death had been an accident. The silence after had been a choice. The police officer stepped forward quietly. No drama, no raised voices. As Penelope was led away, Agatha remained by the mantelpiece, eyes lingering on the fireplace where the truth had nearly vanished into ash. James had tried to do a good thing. Someone had decided they couldn't survive it. Agatha closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, resolve settling where grief had been. The village would recover, but it would never be quite as polite again.
Chapter 8. Restoration. Carsely mourned the way it did everything else, politely, with tea. The church hall smelled of Earl Grey, lemon slices, and the faint dustiness of stacked chairs that had witnessed decades of restrained emotion. Plates of biscuits sat untouched at first, as if eating too soon might seem disrespectful. People spoke in low voices, sentences trailing off where feelings might otherwise have appeared. Agatha stood near the window, cup warm in her hands, watching condensation creep slowly down the glass. Outside, the village green looked exactly as it always had. That felt wrong and comforting all at once. James Lacey had been mourned before, in theory, fond anecdotes, nostalgic sighs, but now he was being mourned properly, without pretense, without competition. Miranda Sharp stood nearby, eyes red but steady, speaking quietly with the vicar. There was no grace performance today, no effortless warmth, just honesty. Agatha found she respected that. Penelope's absence hung in the room like a missing note. No one said her name. They would later, in careful conversations behind closed doors. For now, Carsely exhaled, uncertain but relieved the pretending was over. Agatha sipped her tea. It was too weak. She moved to the table and added another bag, ignoring the look someone gave her. James would have approved. He'd always complained people were too timid with flavor, as with truth. She remembered him as he had been, not idealized, not diminished, just present, helpful in irritating ways, kind without fuss, someone who believed problems could be solved quietly if one bothered to try. "I'm sorry," she murmured, not to anyone in particular. Later, back at her cottage, the quiet felt different, not heavy, settled. Hodge greeted her with a reproachful yowl. Boswell circled her ankles like a living question mark.
"Yes, yes," Agatha said, setting down her coat. "I'm late. Society demanded my presence." She fed them, the familiar ritual anchoring her again. The sound of crunching biscuits, the soft brush of fur against her leg. Domestic life resumed without asking permission. Agatha sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of properly strong tea, and let herself think of James one last time, not with irritation, not with regret, but with acceptance. They had been unfinished. That was all. Outside, someone laughed. A door closed. Life continued, gently insisting. Carsely would change, she knew, just slightly. Politeness would remain, but beneath it, an awareness. Secrets had weight. Good intentions could still cause harm, and silence, chosen too often, could be dangerous. Agatha glanced around her kitchen, at the cats, at the quiet order of things. She felt no urge to investigate, to prod, to interfere. Not tonight. But tomorrow would bring its own questions. It always did. She raised her mug in a small, private toast. "Goodbye, James," she said. "You were a nuisance, but you meant well." Hodge blinked slowly. Boswell purred, and in the comfortable quiet of her cottage, Agatha allowed the village and herself to rest, knowing that peace, like truth, was something one earned moment by moment.
Agatha Raisin unlocked her front door and was immediately informed, loudly and without nuance, that she was late. Hodge sat directly in her path, a large, disapproving obstacle with whiskers, while Boswell paced in tight circles, meowing as though filing a formal complaint. The cottage smelled faintly of dust, wool, and the lingering ghost of yesterday's toast. Home. Judgmental, comforting home. "Yes, yes," Agatha said, kicking off her shoes. "I know, starvation, cruelty, headlines imminent." She hung up her coat, aware of how quiet the village felt tonight. Not empty, just settled, like a room after guests have gone and the furniture has been nudged back into place. Carsely had absorbed the shock, rearranged itself, and decided to continue. Agatha filled the cat's bowls. They ate with purpose, shoulders hunched, as if daring the universe to interrupt them. The sound grounded her more effectively than tea ever could. She leaned against the counter and watched them, allowing herself a rare moment of stillness. James was gone. That truth no longer stabbed, it rested. There was relief in that, and guilt, and acceptance braided together so tightly she stopped trying to separate them. Life resumed, she thought, but not exactly as before. The village would smile the same. Committees would still form. Cakes would still be judged unfairly. But something subtle had shifted. People would hesitate before assuming, before smoothing things over, before choosing silence. Agatha poured herself a drink she didn't pretend was medicinal and took it into the sitting room. She sat, feet tucked beneath her, and let the quiet settle properly this time. No ticking clocks, no unfinished conversations. A knock came at the door. Agatha froze, then sighed. "Honestly," she muttered, setting down her glass. It was only the post, one letter pushed halfway through the slot, edges slightly crumpled. She picked it up, noting the unfamiliar handwriting. Not police, not village council, something else. Hodge and Boswell appeared instantly, interest piqued. "Don't start," Agatha warned them, but she opened it anyway. The letter was brief, polite, vague in that way that suggested intention rather than confusion. Someone had heard about her talent for sorting things out. There was a situation, a request, a hint of trouble, carefully wrapped in understatement. Agatha read it twice. Boswell jumped onto the arm of the chair, peering at the page. Hodge sat at her feet, expectant. She smiled despite herself. "Well," she said, folding the letter neatly, "it seems peace is only temporary." The cats did not object. Agatha stood, stretching, feeling the familiar click of resolve settling into place. She wasn't eager, she wasn't reluctant, she was simply ready again. She glanced around her cottage, at the mismatched furniture, the faint smell of tea, the quiet companionship of creatures who expected consistency and provided judgment in return. This was her normal.
Altered, perhaps, sharpened, but intact. Agatha placed the letter on the mantelpiece, right where she wouldn't forget it. "Dinner first," she told the cats firmly. "Then we'll see what the world wants." Hodge blinked. Boswell purred. Outside, Carsely slept peacefully, unaware that somewhere nearby another small disruption was already knocking politely at the door. Thank you for joining Agatha on this delightful misadventure. If you enjoyed the story, do let us know in the comments, and perhaps share it with a friend who loves a good murder with a cup of tea. Until next time, stay curious and stay cozy.